FUSWA. We do have council members. All the council members of FUSWA, can you please stand up? All right, these guys are students just like me. We are an academic association, student-led, student-run. So please, yep, Nan, come on, stand up. All the council members, yep, we're growing and growing and growing. If you want to know about FUSWA, you want to know about council, how to become a council member, it's all on our website. There are business cards here and brochures. I want you guys, if you can, give these. That's okay. I'll shout. So if you can, give these guys a huge round of applause because they're working hard.
Welcome everyone, so good to see you here. I can't believe there's so many people here. I was like, oh, there'll be about 5 people, you know. So it's great, thank you for coming. Before we get started, I just want to quickly introduce everyone to you. So on my right, we have the amazing Alex and Tessie, yes, Tess. And Alex is one of our students who is almost finished. So she's completed 1 placement and just got her final placement to go next semester. Yay! And then I'll introduce myself. I'm Johanna. I'm the topic coordinator for first placement. So you'll probably see me if you're coming on first placement. And I'm also a field ed liaison and an external field educator. And then to my left, we have Annalise and Angela, who are the amazing, hardworking work integrated learning team. So if you have any questions at all before placement, compliance, they're your girls to go to, and they work really hard. And then we also have, not here today, but many of you probably already know Professor Lorna Hallahan. So she is the academic field education lead. Then Tony Kemp is the academic field education coordinator, so basically the coordinator of field ed. And then Luke Roberts, Rebecca Stars, myself and Kirsty are the topic coordinators at the moment. So I'm going to pass you over to Alex, who's going to do an acknowledgement of country for us.
So I would like to acknowledge that the land that we are meeting on today are the unceded lands of the Kaurna country. I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging.
All right, hi everyone. So as Johanna kindly introduced us, Angela and I are the social work placement team. So we work together with the field education academics to get you guys on placement. And we're pretty much running the show for pre-placement process. So that's what we're going to take you through today.
So in this information session, we'll be going through the Semester 1 2024 pre-placement key dates, the nomination for placement survey, the in-place access, student information for placement, the matching process, compulsory compliance items, and then any question time.
All right, so as you know, the pre-placement process involves a lot of steps. So they've got a big timeline here, but most importantly, the next key important date is the 8th of October. So that's when everyone who is planning on going on placement needs to nominate themselves via the nomination for placement survey. So if you haven't done that yet, please check your email for an email to nominate yourself for placement. All eligible students will then be contacted afterwards to start the placement process. If you haven't received the email, please let us know. You can also access it via the flow page. So the CEPSW Work Integrated Learning flow page is also on there. We'll be sending a reminder out tomorrow via email and also on the flow page. So that's the next key important date. We've also printed out for you to pick up at the end of the session a pre-placement calendar, so that it also has all the important dates on there for you to know about, things like when the compliance deadline is, when matching will begin, and when the interviews will begin. All right. So another key thing to note is that nomination for placement survey is not enrolment. So enrolment won't open until the end of November, beginning of December. We haven't quite got that date confirmed, so the enrolment team will let us know. We'll also be in touch with you when you do need to enrol, and that will basically complete that enrolment process. So after you nominate yourself for placement, all students will have their eligibility checked by the enrolment team, and then what we'll do is we'll pre-enroll you onto InPlace, the placement system. Oh, there it is, yeah. All right, so who has used InPlace before? Has anyone used that one before? Yep. All right, so quite a few of you haven't used it yet. So basically, this is the placement system, which will be your main sort of like system that you'll use before you go on placement. You can access this via your Okta dashboard. It's that little blue icon, little person. If you don't have access to it, it might still be hidden, but that doesn't mean you can't actually use it. You can use the URL, so the inplace.flinders.edu.au, but you might need to contact the IT team to have it unhidden from your dashboard. But all students have access to this once they're enrolled in a topic. And this is where you can click on, when you head to InPlace, you click on the fan in your top right corner of the page, and you'll find your details. So it'll have a whole section with compliance and then a section for student information.
So compulsory compliance items. These are due by November the 24th. That's the deadline. There's a whole list there. You will be emailed a checklist that will provide you with all the compliance that's required. Now, you cannot start placement until all your compliance has been uploaded to InPlace and verified by a WIL staff member. Some placements require you to have additional compliance. If that's the case, we will notify you in an email, and you'll have a separate deadline to upload those. So not all students will need to have additional compliance, only those, and we will notify you if you do.
All right, but before we get into compliance, what we want to do is get some information from you, and this will assist us with matching. So we ask that you, once you're finished the survey, head to InPlace and start updating your student information. So this information helps us quite a lot with the matching process. Agencies will have their own requirements for placements, and then we need to also marry up the requirements that each individual student has. So it's quite a complicated process. So basically, by providing us as much information as possible, that can help us find the best fit for your placement. But knowing that because of all these factors that come in, we unfortunately cannot guarantee any specific type of placement or preference for placement, because there are some circumstances that just have to be taken into account of first. And so this is basically a stripped back, simple explanation of how placement matching works. So we take into things like, your living address, the special circumstances that students might have, number of days, their experience, area of interest, and then we have the placement, which also has its own location, whether it's supervised, whether the student is required to drive an agency vehicle or their own vehicle, whether they prefer a final or a first placement student, all of that. And we try to get the best fit for each student. And there are different types of placements, and so now Angela will talk about work-based placements.
So work-based placements, what is it? These are placements in a place of employment. It may involve payment or it may be unpaid. Work-based placements can be considered when there is a clear distinction between a student's employment role and their placement role. There is more information on work-based placements available on the FUSWA Integrated Learning Flow website, and that goes on to the rural placements.
And at the moment, I'm the person So you need to apply, and there's a special form to fill out, and you need to get the agency to also sign that form, and then it comes into the system, then it comes to me, and then I can look at whether we think it's an appropriate placement. Basically, the two things we're looking at is that your role is different to your current role. So some people, you know, if I say this to people, if you're about to get a new job and you're about to go on placement and you think that it could be a suitable placement, let us know, because then we can actually look at that as well. So I've had a couple of students come to me lately for, you know, RPL or web-based placements. So it's definitely worth looking at. Or if you're in an agency where you think, you know, it might be, for example, you're a support worker in a NGIS agency that has support coordinators. So it might be worth, if that's an area you're interested in, having a chat with your agency and saying if they would be interested in hosting you for a web-based placement. We're very open to that.
We also offer rural placements. So this is a placement that's in a rural or remote area, say outside of the metropolitan Adelaide area. Again, there's more information about this on the Flow site. You will need to fill in an application form for this. You can be eligible for accommodation to help you with a rural placement. And we've also got a scholarship that can help students on a rural placement. Again, there's more information on the website for you. And yeah, your application will require descriptions of your interest in a rural placement and how you will support yourself while on placement as well.
And again, that comes to me afterwards to have a look to see if it's appropriate. Again, if you're interested and you've got more questions, you can always contact the Blue team, because we do have agencies in rural locations, and sometimes those placements don't get filled, and they're fantastic placements. So if you're interested, let us know or call.
All right, so what happens once you've been matched? So you'll receive a matching notification email from us, from the Flinders Social Work Placement team, and attached to that information, to that email will be important documents, including the pre-placement checklist and the pre-placement calendar. You'll need to follow the instructions in that matching notification to set up the placement interview. So in some cases, the agency will require you to contact them via email to set up that placement interview, but there may be circumstances where the placement agency prefer to contact you instead. You will then want to prepare for the placement interview, and you've got the CEPSW Flow site where there's a placement interview guide, as well as in that checklist that we mailed you, there is a interview guide in that as well. So we'll now go through some interview preparation as well. Yeah. So the placement interview is basically an opportunity for you and the agency to see if that placement is a great fit for you. So the agency obviously want to learn a bit about you, but it's also an opportunity for you to discuss your learning goals and what it is that you can bring to the placement. It's not really an opportunity to discuss what you want post-placement, to discuss about your job opportunities, because it's about the placement and your learning. So it's about the opportunity for that placement. In section 3 of that pre-placement checklist, there will be interview preparation, which kind of goes through what to do before the interview, things like setting up an email signature, as well as on the day, so like what to wear, the travel route and all that sort of thing. Some hot tips though are to head to Career Hub. So if any of you haven't used Career Hub before, that is a free service. It's accessible via your Okta dashboard. So you'll see the orange icon there. And there are social work specific resources. So there's resources on interview preparation. There are in-person workshops on interviews as well. So it's a lot of free resources. So I encourage you to go on there and have a look. Alternatively, you can do it on your own. We recommend you research as much as you can about the agency and its services, and then knowing what the agency does, then consider how your own learnings, what you've learned in your topic and your own experience can contribute to that work. Think about what interests you about the agency and write all of this out. Write it out so it's in your mind, and then talk about those examples out loud. So like, it might be embarrassing, but just in front of a mirror and just say it out loud, and so then you can hear yourself saying it. So then on the day, it's more familiar, you're more comfortable, and you'll probably have a better placement experience there. The other thing to do that we recommend is to write out examples of your strengths and weaknesses and how you can overcome those weaknesses. And it's really good to just, write it out. It kind of just helps you to really think about it when you do that. And then you won't feel on the spot as well, because there's quite often an agency will ask that. They will ask what your strengths and weaknesses are. And you don't, sometimes you might think, oh, what are my strengths and weaknesses? But if you've already thought about it and written out examples, it will give you a better start. So Johanna will now take you through some questions that you might be asked in the interview.
So, thank you. I just want to highlight that it is an interview process. So when we match you, it doesn't mean that you're definitely going to be going to that placement. You have to pass the interview. And depending on the agency, some agencies, I guess, are more stringent, is that the word, than others. So, most people do pass the interviews, but some people don't. So I really do recommend preparation. It is like a job interview, okay? So some of the questions they might ask you, and I personally have to interview everyone. I personally interview everybody afterwards who fails an interview. So I can tell you some of the reasons why. And I also talk to the agency afterwards. So some of the reasons people have not been successful in the interview is because they were asked to talk about why they decided to study social work and they didn't know. Or they said, I don't want to be here. This is like my parents making me do it. I'm really not interested. These are some of the things that, have been said in interviews. And I'm not being rude to, we want you to be honest, but, you can be honest without, revealing that perhaps it's not your choice placement, right? Because, you may prefer a mental health setting, for example, and you've ended up in disability. But, that's okay. That's a reality. But, don't let the interviewer know that, okay? Keep that to yourself or your friends, all right? I understand, I get it, because I'm a student myself and I've studied several things. You might not know whether you want to do social work until you go on your first placement. That's okay too, but maybe talk about, what led you here? What are you interested in? Are you interested in, helping people, or, you've had difficult grief experiences in your life, so you want to learn how to support people in that, or whatever it is that made you apply in the first place, okay? What social work skills do you hope to learn during this placement? That's a big one that they often ask and students are stumped by, because they're like, well, I think I'm going to learn once I get here. I just want to learn. And it's like, you need to know more than that. So one of the ways to do that is to, research the website, have a look at job descriptions for similar jobs, and so have a little bit of understanding as much as you can, of the area before you go in for that. Try to be more specific than generic, like, I just want to learn to be a social worker. But what actual skills, what skills do you bring to this placement? That's a big one as well. And I think, Annalisa's talking about, strengths and weaknesses. I've been in interviews, and that's one of the things you always prepare for. And you think about a weakness, but then you think about a solution to that. For me, it might be, I normally struggle with time management, but the way around this is I do this, right? I know this sounds terrible, but maybe pick a weakness that is, easy to work with, or that you have a solution for. Does that make sense? Don't say something like, I really don't know how to get along with people. That's not going to work. Okay, I'm sorry, but sometimes we just have to say this out loud, and you can get stressed. And I think it's a really good idea to prepare, as Annalise said, because I'm the same when I go for an interview. You suddenly go blank and like, what did they say? And don't be afraid to say, I'm sorry, could you please rephrase that? I didn't hear that, or I didn't quite understand. That's fine. Okay. What do you know about our organisation? Again, you know, you don't have to know everything, but at least have gone to the website, have a look, say, look, you know, I'm hoping to learn more once I'm, you know, if I'm placed here. But from what I've read on the website, and my understanding is, you know, you provide services, homeless services, or you provide mental health services for young people. You know, have a little bit of information there. Again, we've talked about that. What are your strengths and weaknesses, and what are you doing to address your weaknesses? Alex, did you want to talk about your first interview and any kind of suggestions for that?
I can. So I found that, at least with the first interview I had, is to a degree is remembering to be yourself. They want you, not a mask that you could possibly put up in that instance. They want to know you, because if you'll be with them for 500 hours. You can't keep up a mask for 500 hours. That they want to know how you're going to fit with the team that you're going to be working with. And that's something you can actually ask them, is if it's someone different doing the interview, actually ask them, well, who's in the team I'm going to be working with? What are they like? And actually show interest and say, oh, okay, well, this could be interesting because I could bring this to that situation then. So actually, so don't be afraid to actually ask questions back. Yeah. If you're not sure of questions, that's something that they can actually look and go, no initiative. Yeah. It is a great way to show initiative, to ask your own questions.
Mm-mm. And talk about your previous experience and, you know, what you've learnt from that. So, like, I know, did you talk about your experience of being like a scout leader in your interview?
Yeah, especially with the first place I did have an interview with was working with foster kids. So being a scout leader, perfect correlation point. Bring up hobbies if they're relevant as well. So if where you're going's got, say, a music program for kids, if you like listening to or playing music, talk about it. Relate your own interests into placement.
That's good. Thanks, Alex.
All right, thank you guys. Perfect. But yeah, I think that sums up pretty well. It is 500 hours. It's a long time. So you want to be comfortable with your placement agency. So being yourself is great advice. You definitely want to put yourself forward. For any sort of other information, Angela will take you through this one.
So all this information and all other information is available to you on Flow. We will also upload this PowerPoint presentation, so you'll be able to rewatch it or have a look at it. Plus there's the recording. You're also welcome to come and visit Annalise or myself face-to-face. We are located in the Education Building on level 4. You just need to go to the college reception desk and then ask for one of us, and we'll be able to meet with you. And of course, there's always our generic email address. That's swplacements@flinders.edu.au. If you've got any queries, you can always email us and we will get back to you and answer your questions.
Yeah, and then of course, if you do have an access plan, and you think there might need to be some considerations for placement, they're definitely happy to work with that as well. So all you need to do is just identify that you might have one in place, and then you can discuss with your topic coordinator, whoever that might be, around if there are accommodations for placement. You don't need to disclose to us what your reason for having an access plan is. We don't need to know that. All we want to know is, whether it means you need to have a place that doesn't have stairs or something like that. It could be anything. And then we will put that into basically our matching process and make sure that we match you to an appropriate placement. The other thing that you might want to know is that, there are some scholarships available. So as we mentioned before, there's the Andrew Tyne Reid Scholarship. It's currently not open yet, but we're waiting for student services to let us know when it will be open, and we'll definitely be posting about that. It's a fantastic scholarship. It's for rural placements. Basically, it can support up to 10 students from psychology and social work to do their placement in a rural location, which is a huge help because we know obviously there's a huge burden for doing a 500-hour placement. So it's a great opportunity, as well as any other scholarships that might be available. So we do recommend to have a look at that. And then, lastly, we just advocate for using the Flow site. So the Flow site obviously is going to be live until the end of the year. There will then be a Canvas site. It's not open yet, so that's why we still have the Flow site. Everything's been updated for semester 1 2024, so you can find the pre-placement checklist on there if you want to have a look at it now, the pre-placement calendar, any information on rural, work-based, interstate placements. As there's also information on specific placements, so once you're matched, you can have a look at different placements like community placements, school placements, SA health placements, all that sort of stuff. It's all on there for you to use.
And can I just advocate for access plans? So if you have if you have high caring responsibilities, for example, so you're caring for your mother or father or an elderly relative, or have children with disabilities, please go and get an access plan. Or if you yourself, it could be anything. It can be mental health issues. It can be chronic pain. Being blind, right? Invisible illnesses as well. Go and get an access plan, because what that means is that you get to meet with myself or whoever's in that role beforehand, so that we can find out how can we support you best on placement. And you get longer, and obviously we try and support other people as well, but you do get a bit more tailored support.
Well, like prime example, I'm happy to share what's on mine. I've got capacity to drop to 2 days a week for placement if I absolutely need to. So that's just a simple explanation of what an access plan can do if that's something you need.
Yeah. And also be mindful and let us know, in place. I think there's a place for it. If you think you could be triggered by a certain environment, so if you yourself have been, in child protection, and you just cannot do child protection, please write that there, and we will not place you in that area. Okay, so sometimes you don't know till you're on placement whether you're going to get triggered, but if there's something that, or you've just had a death in the family and we put you in a hospice or something, so put that information there so that we're aware when we're matching you. Okay. There'll be a question time, and then I'm going to talk more about the specifics of field education.
Yeah, so if anyone has any questions about the pre-placement process before we get into what is field education, please let us know and we'll do our best to answer them.
Yes.
Just with the checks, like the national police check and stuff, do we just apply for all of that ourselves now? Like, I haven't done this system, so I have to do that for a number of years because they last in 3 years. So is there, like, we just do all that ourselves?
Yeah, so the national police check, that will be done by the student specifically.
Is it working though?
Yeah.
It is.
So the question we had for the recording was about applying for national police checks as well as the DHS checks. So basically the national police check, that's first organised by the student. The student will apply for that. It does have some strict criteria. Due to some of the locations that students go on, the police check must read unsupervised contact with vulnerable groups. If it doesn't have that, unfortunately, we have to ask you to get another police check. For DHS checks, which is the Working with Children check and the Aged Care check, we will initiate those on your behalf. And so what that means is we'll put that into the system and it will be under a tertiary level. So it's the same level as an employment check but cheaper. It means you only have to pay one fee instead of paying twice for the same check. Basically, it means that we put that into the system. You will get an email from the DHS screening unit and you'll then follow the process from there. We can also verify your identity for you. So you can also tick the requesting organisation and then we can do your identity check, which makes things a lot quicker. And then the other clearance that you need is a safe environments training certificate. And I believe on occasion the Student Association has organised group sessions, which also does make it a bit cheaper. So it's a full day of training. It's called the Safe Environments Through Their Eyes. And yes, you can do group sessions. Otherwise, you can book yourself individually into a session.
Does that expire? Because I did it through TAFE. Do you know if that one expires?
Sorry, what was that?
Does the Through Their Eyes have a time limit on it?
Yes, that's 3 years. So for a police check, generally it's 3 years. For working with children, 5 years. Aged care and safe environments is 3 years. But there is a disclaimer with the National Police Check that some agencies do require them to be only 1 year old. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to negotiate that to our standards. So there are occasions such as the Smith family, they will do their own check in addition, not at the student's cost, so that there's a newer police check.
So in terms of the limits,
Is it working?
just in terms of the 1 year limit for national checks, will students be notified if we match into an agency that requires, because like I'm on my second, which means it's already over a year, so will we notify that?
Yes, so in the circumstance that a student is matched to an agency that does require a police check under 1 year, we will put that in the matching notification. We will also try to match students that already have a police check that is under 1 year. If not possible, then we definitely let the student know. And it's not that often. I think there's only a couple agencies that have that requirement. It's just within their own policy, and unfortunately we don't have control over that.
I just want to check with you, Andy, like we did this last year, right? So we've already uploaded all the documents required. So is now if I go to my profile, is it already there or I need to do the upload again?
Yeah, so the documents will still be there and they'll have their expiry. For final placement students, often what you may need to redo is your fitness for placement declaration. So that needs to be updated before each placement just to reconfirm that you're fit for placement. There may be an expiry on that, but in terms of your placement documents, if you went on placement last year, then in theory everything should be in date and you shouldn't need to update anything. The only things that have a 1 year expiry are things like the CPR, although it's unlikely you would need CPR for 2 placements. The hand hygiene, so that's something for aged care placements, and where specified the police check by an agency, as well as the flu vaccination. So where students go on aged care or SA health placements, it has to be the current year flu vaccination.
With the work-based placement, is the payment associated with the responsibility of the organization, or is it something that is negotiated by the students? I'm talking in terms of those that are willing to pay, and how do we know?
That's a great question. So the payment, I think if I understand your question, is the payment comes from the agency, and you would have to negotiate that with your agency that they're willing to pay you to be in that other role. People still do work-based placements that aren't paid as well, because sometimes agencies, will agree to the work-based placement but don't have the funds to pay for that. Janine, did you want to add anything? No?
Yeah.
Just to welcome the lovely Janine. Janine has been the field educator. You probably all know her through her topics, but she is the guru on field education. So, yes, welcome. So feel free to ask questions as well.
Yeah, with the work-based placements, if you do already work in an organisation that has social work in it, I would recommend talking to your supervisor or your HR manager around their own requirements for doing a placement. Some organisations such as Department of Child Protection, SA Health or Relationships Australia, or even Anglicare SA, they have their own processes and own requirements. So, for example, the Department of Child Protection require you to have already worked within their organisation for a minimum of 2 full-time equivalent years. And so you need to go through their own process to apply to do a placement. And so you might be best to talk to them first around what it is. And then some agencies, as Johanna said, they may not be paying you for your placement, while others may basically be putting you into another work role in which you are paid. It's really dependent on the organisation, so really we just recommend having a chat with someone in a management position around what they require and if it's possible. It is often a really supportive way to do a placement, and we definitely recommend if it's possible to ask about it.
The application, is it just downloading the documents from the website and filling it out?
Yep. And getting your agency to fill it out, then uploading it, and then it will come to me or whoever's in my position at the time, and we will look at it. And what happens then is basically, I'll send an email to yourself and the agency, and then I'll make time to chat with the agency and yourself. And because we have to just make sure that it would be an appropriate social work placement, and that you're a good fit for that. And if that goes well, which almost all of them do, and then that becomes your match and your placement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What if that agent, so the agency would provide us, like, let's say, work-based treatment, provide us with a supervisor, which is a senior social worker, but the university would still provide us, like, the
Example of educator. So, yeah, that's a great question. And some of you might know this, I'm going to go through it later, but when you're on placement, you have several supervisors. You have your on-site supervisor, so your day-to-day supervisor. They may or may not be a social worker. Then if they're not a social worker, then you'll also have what we call an EFE, an external field educator, and we provide that person from the university, and they'll meet with you for an hour and a half roughly each week to provide the supervision that's required by the AASW. And then as well as that, you have what we call a field education liaison. And they are basically the liaison between you and your agency in the university, and they will come in and meet with you and assess you and make sure that you're meeting all your learning outcomes. So in a work-based placement, you can have either. You can have, for example, an agency doesn't have a social worker. We will provide that EFE. But some agencies do have a social worker, and then you won't need it. Some agencies do have a social worker, but then don't have the time to give that proper, not the proper, but that 1.5 hour, connection to theory. So then we can also provide them with an EFE as well. If it's your second placement, because I think it's your second placement, you just have to make sure that if you had a social work supervisor in your first placement on site, you don't need it for the second. But if you didn't, you're supposed to have it you're supposed to have a social worker on site for one of your placements. Sometimes we're able to work around that, but generally that's the rule. Is that right, Janine?
Yeah, up the back.
Yeah, I have a question about important dates.
Mhm.
I was just going through the important dates, and so there's this January 8th, I can't pay for offshore students. So if you're planning a trip overseas, do you have to come before January 8th? That's what it means?
Yeah, so what that means is we may have students who are currently offshore, and in order to meet all the, basically getting all their checks and everything, it's the last time that we would want them to be offshore, so they need to be here by January the 8th. So this is for students who are not here currently. So students who are currently offshore studying distance, and then if they're going to do their placement here in Australia, they need to be here by January the 8th. So it's not for students who are going away over the pre-placement period. However, we do actually say that it's not really recommended to be away during that period, just because if there are issues with any compliance documents that you may be required to obtain, some of them do require you to be here in person. So we generally do recommend that students are here for the pre-placement process. If you are away though, please let us know, and then we can put that into our matching criteria, because there are circumstances that students just can't avoid, and we will just put that in the match notification either to match them early or late for placement. Being away over the period as well does mean it may limit your placement options, because some placement agencies will be wanting to interview you from January, and so if you are away and they can't interview you later, it means that we will have to match you to agencies that you may not prefer. But yeah, so that date is purely for students who are not already here in SA.
And do be mindful that from the 15th of January, that's when placements start to be released, and you need to be here for your interview. As Annalise said, if you're not, then we will just have to match you with an agency that we can match you with when you get back, and that we can't look at your preferences then. Also, just be mindful that some placement matching occurs a little bit earlier, so like DCP and SA Health. So if you're interested in those, or you've been matched, you need to be available. Do we know roughly what dates?
Yes, so DCP and SA Health will look at doing interviews at early as December, so it could even be late November. So we haven't got the offers just yet, but we'll be getting them very soon. And because the processes for both DCP and SA Health in particular, there's quite a lot to do. They get matched earlier. So there may be times when a student is matched to a placement before the December break.
So just be aware too that just because someone else has been matched doesn't mean you haven't been matched, because we don't just match everybody and then release it all. It comes out
Staggered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't realise placement started so early, and I am going away for, I've got 3 days that I'm going away for that cut into the placement time. Is that something I talk to you guys about? And is that something I talk to in place?
Yeah, so that's something you would email SW placements about. So placement is a non-semester topic. So what that means, being non-semester, is that it sits outside the regular semester. So the regular semester will begin, late February, early March, and then go until June. But the placement topic is non-semester, so it sits outside of that. So that's why there are expectations to be available outside the normal semester. And I know that can be a bit difficult for this upcoming semester because there is a big December break. So that's kind of why everything is starting now, so that we can get as much done before we go away over the holiday break. And then when we return in January, things will begin again. So the default start date for placements, the majority of placements will begin on the 12th of February, but they could be as early as the 29th, or also begin 2 weeks after the 12th as well. In the green?
If you get matched and go to an interview and it doesn't work out, because I'm guessing multiple people might get matched again.
Yes. So generally, there is kind of like a bit of a strike rule for this, but sometimes it just may not work out, and it may not even be the fault of the student or anything. It's just not a good fit. So basically what happens is that student goes back into the matching pool, and we look at rematching them for another placement. The student will also have like a debrief session, usually with either Johanna or Tony, and just kind of to go over what happened in that interview and how to prepare for the next interview, and then we'll put you out again for another placement match, and you'll have an interview. In circumstances where a student maybe is repeatedly failing an interview, it may be that they're not ready for placement, and so we will look at that as well. And also, if a student does fail more than 3, they may not be able to be rematched for a 4th placement. Are you going to get into this in your...
I can answer that one if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to. So there is a minimum. So the minimum requirement for placement in general is 250 hours. However, if a placement is terminated, you can receive a minimum of 70 credit hours depending on what happened in that placement. The maximum, I think, is it 250?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that correct, Jen? Yeah. Of course, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it just means that then you will go on placement again, and you only need to do that requirement. So say you had, 100 hours, then for your next placement, you only have to do 400 hours. It does just depend on the credit hours. There may be circumstances in which you unfortunately had no credit hours, but yeah, as you mentioned, there could be any reason a placement is ended. Even just staff changes, they may no longer be able to support a student, and they just have to, yeah.
It sort of goes on a case-by-case basis because, if a placement, I hate the word, it's called terminated, but if a placement ends because the agency has ended it because they don't feel that the student is learning or is, appropriate, then, in those situations, obviously you would meet with myself or whoever the topic coordinator is, and we'd go through that. And I do a lot of these, not a lot, but I do these meetings. And I listen to the student and I say, well, tell me what happened. So, we don't always, because sometimes it happens, an agency might terminate a placement, but it hasn't necessarily been fair for the student. Okay, so we do go through that process. Sometimes it is, sometimes people are just not ready for placement. So in that particular circumstance, the student and I, or, your topic coordinator for your topic, will have to work out, are you meeting the learning outcomes? So if you're on the way to meeting your learning outcomes, towards mid-placement, then, you're most likely to get credit hours. If, really you're not able to demonstrate any learning, then obviously we can't give credit, because you've got to be aware too that we're reducing the hours you've got in your next placement. So, like if I'm not saying you specifically, right, but say we had a student that was really struggling, that it wouldn't be fair anyway on them. If I gave them 250 hours credit, they've only got 250 hours in the next placement to actually get into it, get to know things, and it's not enough. So generally, it really depends on the situation. If it's on your end, so we have a few pregnant students or people that have had deaths and they've had to go home, that's the same situation. So generally, they would be able to, mostly in those circumstances, we just have a conversation and they'll be able to talk about their learning, and I'll be able to say, okay, yeah, I can see how you're learning here. Yep, we can give the credit hours for where you're at because you're meeting those learning outcomes, or maybe not all, or some, and then they can, come back and do. Janine, with leave, what's the maximum? Do you know what I mean? Like if they have to go home for a bereavement, is there like a maximum time that they can take leave from the placement? Or
it's hard to say really,
yeah.
depending on circumstances.
Yeah.
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 It's probably at this stage that's not the kind of thing to worry about.
Yeah. So we're there. Basically, we're there. We're here for you. We're not going to go, oh, the agency said go away, or you haven't got to go away. We're going to work with you to do what's in your best interest and be here to listen to you. We work really hard, don't we, to do that. So yeah.
To add to that question, for example, if I'm not asking for myself, but if the placement is terminated after 350 hours,
Yeah.
and the student is found that he or she can be rematched or should be rematched, the student still has to do a minimum of 250 hours again, so it's doing extra 100 hours. I'm just wanting to reiterate and ask again that that's the rule, isn't it? That minimum of 250 for a match again.
Yeah.
And look, again, this is not something you have to worry about. It's an individual situation. But if you were at 400 hours or 450, it may well be that we work together to, create a project or something like that. So you've really got to look at the individual circumstances. So again, we're here to support you. We want you to do well. So yeah. Does that answer the question? Yeah. So what you said is correct.
If there are no other questions, we'll pass it along to Johanna to go over the finer details of your placement.
All right, I'm going to get Alex to help me here when necessary. I will throw over to Alex or Janine in the back there. Okay, so yes, I was thinking about trying to find a chair for you. Can we grab a chair for Janine? Excellent. I'm so relieved that Janine's here because she's the guru. Okay, so as you would know already, even though you haven't been on a placement, or some of you haven't been on a placement, social work is a practice-based profession. You know, you can learn all the theory and get high distinctions, but you can't be a social worker just by learning the theory. You have to learn how to practice, okay? So that is what placement is for. So according to the International Federation of Social Workers is a practice-based profession and an academic discipline, and it promotes social change and development, social cohesion, and the empowerment and liberation of people. It's based on principles of social justice, human rights, collective responsibility, and respect for diversity. We're underpinned by many theories from different collectives, so from social work, social sciences, humanities, Indigenous knowledge. Social work engages people and structures to address life challenges and enhance their wellbeing. And I often say to students that our vehicle of work is our relationship with the client or with the group. And we are working with them to navigate the systems in their life, whether it be, you know, housing or relationships or Centrelink. This is completely plagiarised from the AASW site. I better actually change the slide. So what do you think social workers do? They partner with people to address personal difficulties and structural barriers in their lives, and you can be working with individuals, families, groups, or communities. And social work also can involve non-people facing roles, so either as an employee, consultant, policy maker in government or community organisations. I think there's some food here. Are we giving out food? Feel free to help yourself as I'm talking. It's all good. Okay, so if you have a look at the ASW website, it's fantastic, and it tells you all about the different things that social workers do. So it's very diverse. So it could be one-on-one counselling, it could be group work, it could be case management, it could be community development, it could be advocacy, it could be policy making. So when you get on placement, because I'm currently working with my first placement students, they are so varied. You know, there are people who are in DCP, Department of Child Protection, SA Health, youth mental health, schools, aged care, policy, research, private practices, NDIS. It is very varied and broad. And so sometimes one of the biggest things for you on your first placement is actually working out, well, what is the social work role where I am? Because you may not have a social worker there, but it doesn't mean that you're not doing social work, because it's about the lens that you're using. So field education, as I said before, enables you to integrate what you're learning in the classroom into practice. So that's why you have that supervisor that I told you about working with you, so that you can work with them each week and reflect on, oh, you know, when I met with this client or when I ran this group, this is what happened. And then you can reflect together on, okay, well, was I using, you know, coming from a strength-based perspective, or, you know, was I client-focused or child-centred? That's where you can actually reflect on your practice, reflect on, well, am I doing best practice, or how can I change my practice? What worked? What didn't? That's where you're going to make those linkages. It also, field education socialises you into the profession. So you get to be with other social workers or other human service agency workers. So that's how we learn, isn't it? By being with other people and getting to know the environment. Did you want to add anything to that about your placement experience? No? Okay. We'll jump in if there's anything exciting you want to share.
So I've only done one so far. I did mine in a community centre. So it was all community-based social work practice. So a lot of policy work, strategic planning, business plans, program involvement, risk assessments and audits as needed as well. So it was quite a varied placement, and Johanna was my EFE. So Jo knows all about that placement.
I do.
It sounds like you had to walk away from relationships. Is that what it is?
It wasn't, I wouldn't say away from relationships, I would say different relationships. So not only were you working with the community, you're working with the volunteers and the staff within the centre too. So it's different relationships, not moving away from them. So you've got community and professional. So it was split into those two essentially.
Don't forget your D&D groups. Tell
Oh
them about that.
yeah. So not only that, but I actually managed to use one of the programs I got myself involved with. I do tabletop role-playing games, so things like Dungeons and Dragons and things like that was one of the programs. And I managed to get in there to help do volunteer work for that once a fortnight. Got to count that for my hours, but not only that, because it was a program within the centre, I then used it as my mid-placement assessment.
So we had to dress up and
Yes.
play Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes, my mid-placement assessment was 60 minutes of Dungeons and Dragons. And my fell went, what have I gotten myself into? But the four of them at the table had a great time, and I had everything planned out. It got to the end and I'm like, screw up my notes and over the shoulder. I should have realised this was going to happen with social workers and development officers in the room. But it worked. And then being able to provide my FEL with evidence of how the 8 standards actually applied within the 60 minutes we'd just done was the groundwork for that. So yeah, we had 60 minutes of having an absolute wonderful time. we did record it.
Yes.
It was recorded, but I proved all 8 standards in that 60 minutes in a completely different medium. So don't necessarily think that, I've got to do a presentation, I've got to stand there and talk for 40 minutes. No.
So you're the one, I don't know if I missed it, you're talking about mid-assessment.
Mid-assessment. Yeah. Yeah.
I will go through that. So don't you worry.
Joe's got you covered.
Okay, so I've already talked about this, but field education is about transferring what you're learning in the classroom, developing your skills, having the opportunity to actually practice working with clients, and then developing a professional identity, and that is how you learn to become a social worker. Oh, thank you. Just on the other, I was going to say the boring things, on the prerequisites, you have to make sure that you pass all your prerequisites to go onto placement. So just be mindful of that, okay? If you want to know more, ask the Wheel team. So we are bound by the Australian Social Work education and accreditation standards. So you can read that, you can find it online, but basically the important bits that you need to know is that you need to complete 1,000 hours of placement, that it cannot involve more than 3 placements, generally it's 2, and that those 2 areas need to be quite different. So, if you're working with youth in the first one, you might be working in community in the second one. You could still, for example, work with youth again, but it might be in a different context. So maybe the first time was mental health and then the second time is NDIS, but they have to be different. I know for my placements many years ago, I was a group worker and I was so scared. I did not want to go on a placement to do individual work. And they're like, you don't have a choice. You have to. You're a group worker. And so I did, and I loved it. It was amazing, but it was scary too because I was pushing myself out of my comfort zone. No placement less than 250 hours. It has to be direct practice. Now, direct practice doesn't necessarily mean that you're with clients all the time. It's those things we were talking about before, whether it's case management, policy, it can be direct practice. It can be, one-on-one practice, but that is only one form.
Community and professional.
Exactly, yeah.
That's mine was.
Yeah, so it can be split between, you had to write some policies, but then you were also working with young people running groups, and also you were doing some craft groups, and so it can involve multiple types of roles.
Just to clarify, as we says, only one placement has to have direct practice.
Sorry. Oh, yes. Did I say that? Is it on there? Do I need to change it?
That's all right. 500 hours.
Oh, thank you. Oh, my goodness. Okay, this is why we have Janine here. Thanks, Janine. I'm still learning. I've got my L plates on. Okay, so one placement generally has to have an on-site social worker. Sometimes we work around that, but generally you need to have an on-site social worker for one. And active involvement. So, for example, you can't just shadow the entire time. You have to, of course, you're going to be shadowing, like working alongside someone to start with to learn, but you actually have to be doing the work as part of your placement. You can't just watch. Unfortunately, because sometimes it's easier, isn't it, to watch, but when you actually do it, it's scary, but that's how you learn. So direct practice, oh, there we go, answer the question. Direct practice is interventions with and on behalf of individuals, families, groups and communities aimed at achieving the most effective outcomes for their health and wellbeing. So for example, if you were working in an NDIS placement, maybe in support coordination, you might be advocating for a client with NDIS or with Centrelink. Generally you'd have your client there too, but sometimes you might not, and you're still doing direct practice because you're working on behalf of that client or that community. Focus is on the application of interpersonal skills, includes group work, community development, advocacy, project work with service users. It doesn't have to include case management work with individuals or counselling, although it often does, it doesn't have to. Okay, so supervision requirements. So you must receive your field educator, your external field educator that I was talking about, has to have at least 2 years of practice experience as a social worker and be eligible for registration with the ASW. Or if you have an on-site field educator, like often in DCP and SA Health, you might have an on-site social worker as your supervisor. Again, they have to have had 2 years of experience as a social worker. So sometimes they may not have had that. So you might get that, plus you'll get an external field educator, okay? They can be on-site or external, so depending on where you are, I've got students interstate that have an external field educator. They meet via Teams. Generally it's face-to-face, but sometimes depending on yourself and the EFE, it might be via Teams as well. You need to have 1.5 hours of formal supervision for every 35 hours of practice, which is 21 hours, is that correct? Overall of your placement. And at least half of that needs to be individual supervision, so 11 hours. 10 hours can be group supervision. So in some placements, for example, aged care, people will have individual supervisors maybe fortnightly, but then they might meet as a group on that other week to have group supervision. Maximum 50% of social work supervision. Yep, so I've talked about that. Okay, so this is just a bit of a timeline for you when you're on placement. So you've got 500 hours, right? It sounds like a long time, but believe me, now as I'm doing mid-placements and we're actually coming towards end of placements, all the students say, oh my gosh, this has gone, so quickly, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's so quick, I couldn't believe it.
It does. So in that first 100 hours, it's really about orientating yourself to the agency, getting to know what they do, their practices, their policies, getting to know the context. And if you're in first placement, there's a document that you will complete called the context. I can't remember what it's called. It's called the agency context. Thank you. Organisational context. Excellent. So you'll complete that document, which kind of gives you prompting questions about when did your agency begin? What are their values? How long have they been around? What policies and legislation are they under? So that's what you spend your time doing in the beginning. You establish supervision, so it's up to you. You're supposed to initiate that with your supervisor. You may sign a supervision contract. You may have a supervision note-taking template that you use, depends on the agency. And you also have a reflective learning journal, which you'll learn about when you start the topic, and that is something that we expect students for an hour, half an hour to an hour a day while they're on placement to be reflecting on their practice, working on either their their assessment for practice or actually reflecting on their practice and using that reflective journal. And often what students do is they'll take some of that reflective journal into supervision each week and unpack their practice and explore it and look at, how could it be better? What did they do well? What did they do differently? And you also will develop what we call a learning map. So that is just basically looking at each of the practice learning outcomes and working out what are the activities that you're going to be doing on placement that are going to help you to learn. Okay, so it might be, do you remember any of the activities you put down for yours?
Well, we did an eco map.
Mm-hmm.
That was a spent ages sitting on the floor doing an
Yes,
eco
we
map.
did, yeah.
I think was the big one that was one of the learning activities we did.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, creating session plans, creating group plans, there are all sorts of things. It depends on the context. So that's that time you'll be finding out about the context and what it is that you're going to be doing and learning. In the 100 to 250 hours, you're doing the work. You're implementing that learning map. Then you're going to have a mid-placement review. That's your first assessment. And I think I have a slide about that in a minute. But at that mid-placement assessment, that's when we meet and we have a conversation about how you're going, how you're meeting each of the learning outcomes, and you share with us how you're doing that. And the point of that meeting is to actually say to you, okay, look, you're doing really well here, here, and here, but for the remainder of the placement, I want you to focus on this, this, and this. Okay, so it is an assessment, but it is a learning opportunity, and we're not there to we're there to support you, if that makes sense. Did you want to add anything about that? And then, as I said, identify anything that you could be doing. So, for example, I've just had a whole heap of mid-placements with students working in mental health with young people. And so a lot of my comments have been around maybe, you know, could you create a practice framework, a professional practice framework, have the opportunity to make sure you get to do an assessment with a client one-on-one, or, you know, looking at where the gaps are. Make sure you do some professional development on working with, you know, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people and their mental health, whatever it might be, the gaps that I'm seeing in their learning. And then for the last 500 hours, you're doing those tasks, you're keeping on going, and often before that, you're doing a lot of shadowing and learning and, you know, getting into the agency and the context, and you might have just started kind of implementing the practice and having a go. So the second half is all about, you know, having a go, then critically reflecting on your practice, and then changing it, improving your practice. And then you have an end of placement assessment in which, again, the same thing, you are showing us through a portfolio and through your meeting and your writing about how you've met all of the learning outcomes. You know, we want to know what you've been doing, but not just what you've been doing, what you've been learning. So, you know, I did this and I learnt that through this. You know, not I did this, this, and this. Does that make sense? So your responsibility as a student is to follow organisational policies and procedures, act professionally. I know that sounds funny that I have to put it there, but we do. And there's a whole social work professional conduct charter that to look at what does that mean, acting professionally. So we go more into that when you do the topic. But, you know, is it showing initiative? Is it being curious? You know, how do you act professionally? Taking responsibility for your own learning. So there's nothing worse when you're in an external field educator role that you turn up to supervision and the student just sits there. And you're like, okay. So, you know, have an agenda, have questions to ask, be curious. You are driving your own learning. We're there to support that learning and help you make the links. Provide feedback and discuss concerns with supervisors. I can't state this highly enough. If you're struggling or there's any issues at all, straight away let us know. Let your field ed liaison know. Let your EFE know. So we can then come in and work with you and support you around that. Prepare for and participate in your assessment. I have already talked about that. I've already talked to you about external field educators. You're going to get a copy of this because you're going to forget, so don't worry about it. I've already talked to you about the field education liaison. They're the ones that review your learning in those mid-placement and end-of-placement meetings. And then you don't forget you're actually part of a topic. So you have a topic coordinator. So at the moment, it is Rebecca Stars for the Bachelor's final placement, Kirsty Lowe for Master's final placement, myself for first placement Master's, and Luke Roberts for Bachelor first placement. So you don't just have to complete 500 hours, you actually do have to do some assessment and show what you're learning. So you're a part of a broader topic. Sometimes students get very focused on the hours, like I've done 500 hours. You can do 1,000 hours, but if you can't explain how you meet the topic outcomes and what you've learned, then you can't pass the topic. So just be mindful that you need to be able to articulate your learning. Practicalities, it's usually 4 days a week. Again, as Alex was saying, she can go down to 2. So that's another good thing of having an access plan, is that you know, we can be aware of whether you might need to go down hours, and that's always negotiable with the agency and yourselves. Some people do towards the end. Some of my students are doing 5 days a week. Some are doing 3. It just generally it's 4 days, but you need to, if it needs to be different, you need to talk to your topic coordinator and your FEL and the agency and work that out with them. Now remind me, with bachelors, are they generally Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday?
Tuesday, Friday.
Okay, so yeah, this is what I always forget, because I'm in the masters. So Tuesday to Friday generally are the placement days for bachelor students, because they usually have classes on the Monday, and for masters it's the opposite, Monday to Thursday, because they have classes on the Friday. But it's, you know, sometimes it changes because if you're external, you might be participating externally in your classes. Yeah, yeah. You can't work from home unless, again, this is something you negotiate with your agency. If your agency works from home, they all work from home 1 day a week, they're doing a particular task, well then it may well be that you can. But that would be something that we worked out with the agency and yourself. If you're based in a school, often sometimes you might still go in for a week because teachers are still there and they're planning. If not, we work with you to develop a work from home plan. But again, that's developed with your FEL. So don't worry if you're in a you know, a school placement, that we will work with you to develop a plan to work from home during school holidays. I'm just trying to think if there any, you can include up to 14 hours of integration activities. So that might be seminars, World Cafe days, lectures. So they're all a part of your placement. So sometimes I get students saying to me, oh, I can't come to the World Cafe Day or to the lecture because I've got placement. And I'm like, yeah, I know you've got placement. That's the whole point. That is a part of your placement. You need to let your agency know at the beginning, these are your dates where you have to attend or you attend online. Obviously, again, if there's special circumstances, we can negotiate. Allocated 1 hour a day. Sick leave, you need to follow the agency policy and let your FEL know. So if the agency policy is you need a sick certificate after 3 days, then you need a sick certificate after 3 days. You need to follow the policy of the agency, but let us know. What can't be counted? Yeah.
Last year when we did our first placement, we used to come to these seminars with like a teacher, like
Yeah.
Is that happening?
It depends on so in first placement at the moment we have we have an orientation day, or like half a day, and then we have a World Cafe day for half a day, and then we have a third World Cafe for half a day, and we have 2 online lectures. So that's what's currently happening in first placement. In final placement, there's 5 integration seminars at the moment. So it depends on whether you're doing first or final placement.
So these integration seminars are the ones which are like how you like divide it into groups and then you sit with your I don't know
Yes.
professor and then that's what happens.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I remember last time when I first placement we had 2 sessions with with Eugenie, and then we had breakout session with other students doing this like similar kind of thing. Doing different.
It's changed now.
Oh, is it changed now? What is it now?
What Johanna was just
It's what I just said. So in first placement, what happens at the moment is you have half an orientation day, which we held in here, right? So you come in on the Monday for 3 hours, and then you come in twice, what we call World Cafe days. So one before mid-placement, one after mid-placement, and then there are 2 lectures that are online. So those are what we call integration activities. In the second placement, at the moment, there are 5 seminars that you can do online or come in depending on how you're enrolled. That may change next semester. It really depends on, because every semester we review, we listen to you guys, so please fill out your sets, because we look at the sets, we look at people's feedback, and then we look at, you know, our accreditation board and their feedback, and then we plan for the next semester. So we do change things, yeah. But it'll be really clear in your topic guide and your topic outline and on campus, yeah. So you can't count, obviously holidays, you know, all the stuff you can't count when you're working, lunch breaks, sick leave. If you go on a camp, if you're sleeping, you can't count it. But if you have to get up I mean, who gets to sleep on a kids' camp? Well, no one really, right? So if you're getting up, you can count the hours, right? But if you're asleep, obviously you can't count the hours, okay? Fair enough. You're not really learning anything there. So you can't do other work. So say you've got an assignment due for groups and communities, you can't do that on placement. But you can do your mid-placement preparation and count that as placement hours, okay? So that's a part of your placement. Self-care. This is the biggest thing that I really want you to be mindful of before and think about over the break before going on placement is how you're going to look after yourself on placement, because many of you will be working and on placement. So, you know, self-care doesn't have to mean, you know, expensive things like going for a spa day. It could be one of my students who's amazing and has actually inspired me just goes to see the sunset every night or walks down the local jetty every night, even when they don't feel like it, even when they're exhausted, they just do it, you know, or meditating for 10 minutes when they get up or when they're laying in bed before they go to sleep. So have a think about while you're on placement, what are you going to do? And what are you going to take away? Can you do less hours? If you have children, can you get somebody to help you? Can you get some childcare? Can you maybe cook some meals beforehand and have them in the freezer? But just think about it, because we acknowledge that it is hard being on placement and working at the same time and doing a topic. I shall say no more about that. I think this is almost the last one. So recognition of prior learning. So if you have 3 years of experience within a social work field or type of work, then you can apply for recognition of prior learning. And even if you are not sure, have a conversation, because at the moment, Tony and myself and Janine, we all look at... Oh, Tony and myself, don't talk to Janine. Talk to me or Tony. I'm happy to go through it with you, and because it is quite a complex process, but it's very worth it, right? But I'm happy to talk to you, and I've had a few meetings this week with people for you to say to me, oh, look, this is what I've been doing, and I can say, look, oh, yeah, I'm pretty sure, you know, where that stands, that looks like, you know, social work, and this doesn't, and I'm happy to we're happy to sort of meet with you before that and say, look, I reckon you should put it in. I've had a couple people lately, I've said, you know, they came to me around work-based placements, and I said, why are you going for work-based? Just go for RPL. You've got so much experience, and they've been successful. So if you think that could be for you, come and see me. Make a time. I'm happy to meet with you. So there are deadlines around that. Oh, do you want to... This is the practical side of the room over here.
Yeah, so if you are thinking about RPL, it does only apply to your first placement. So when you've applied, if you've already had your first placement, then unfortunately that means you won't be able to get RPL. If you're thinking about it though right now and you're thinking of also going on placement first semester, just do both, because if you apply for RPL and it's successful, it's easy for us to just withdraw you from the matching process, and then we basically then give you the credit on in place for that. And if you're unsuccessful, then there's no harm. You're still in the placement process and you can still be considered for a placement for semester 1. There are some deadlines. Usually we would ask the student to have started that process by week 8 of the semester. So I think that has just passed. So if you're thinking about it, do it right now. Yeah. And then, get the process started. It's via Ask Flinders. So you just go on to Ask Flinders. You're basically putting in your CVs, job descriptions, the things you do, and then eventually you would be writing out the examples of how you've met the practice standards.
You basically have to show how what you've done in your work meets the learning outcomes. All right, so that you're showing that you've already got those skills and that experience.
Are the learning outcomes already up, or do you have to be enrolled in the talking to get access to the learning outcomes?
That's a good question.
They're on the website. Yeah, they're on the website. Cool, thank you.
Yeah, and feel free to message me. We're nearly done. Access plans I've talked to you about. Please, 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 if you feel like you need support, apply for an access plan. I recommend it. I've got one for myself in my own study, and it makes a huge difference. It makes it a lot less stressful. You get extra time and things like that. So please think about that. Did you want to say anything more about access plans?
I'll just plug disability services for 5 minutes. So if you're not sure, your best bet is to actually just go and have a chat to the advisors at disability services. They've got a great team down there at the moment who are extremely dedicated to making sure that you get the help and support that you need. I recently had to go through it with Canvas because I had no idea how to navigate Canvas, and they helped me through with all of that. Had issues on an intensive, they helped with that. So it's just a case of go down and talk to them if you're not sure. The worst they can say is there's not really anything here we can put in an access plan, but if nothing else, you've spoken to them and there's stuff recorded on the system. So if something exacerbates, it's already there that you've gone to talk to them about it in the past.
Yeah, you're not suddenly in a moment of stress and then having to navigate this new system and you're already stressed, right?
Yeah.
You're better off doing it when you're not.
Yeah, but no, they're really, really easy to talk to. So yeah, do go down and talk to them if you think you need it. They're more than willing to sit down with you.
Yeah. And on that note as well, I just want to give FUSWA a plug, Flinders Student Association, because they have, they can provide financial support. Sometimes, I don't know if it's been successful, but sometimes if you need assistance with the police checks and things like that, start now. If you maybe go down and see if you can get any financial assistance around that. And also advocacy and support. Like when I have to meet with a student, sometimes I'll bring an advocate. And even in a topic, when I'm topic coordinating, I say to people, look, if you need support or you don't agree with something I've done, obviously tell me. But if you don't feel like you can, please go to FUSA and get some advocacy and support.
They're equal ops officers.
Yeah, they're brilliant. I've already talked about where students are placed. We've talked about students' attendance. COVID, it's a thing, but it's not, if that makes sense. So again, it will be up to your agency as to what the boundaries are. I will say again, case by case, if you have COVID, obviously, you can't go on placement, but if you're not unwell, then talk to your FEL and, perhaps we can do a work from home plan, or you could be working on some mid-placement assessments or something like that. So, but talk to your FEL and your agency. And someone asked before, this is the last slide, someone asked before about assessment. So it's different for each topic, and of course it may change, as I said, because we review each semester. But at the moment, for first placement, you have the two assessments. So it's your mid-placement assessment and your final. So for first placement, you do the document, organisational context document that I always forget the name of. You pick one reflection from your reflective learning log that you've de-identified, which means, you haven't put the name down and I can't identify who you're talking about. And you pick two templates to put in your portfolio, and when you get into the topic, you'll see that there's some examples of templates. It might be a case management template, there might be a group individual session plan, an individual work session plan, community development templates. There's lots of choices. What I recommend to students is if they're in a particular agency and, for example, they have their own assessment and intervention plans that they're creating the clients, well, then they could use that for their two pieces of evidence, but they need to talk with their FEL about that. So really the whole point of that portfolio of those documents is about sharing with your FEL what you've been learning and like how you've learned it and how you're meeting the learning outcomes. And as part of that as well, there is a document called a field education assessment document. So that's the document I talked about with the learning map, the FIAD that you've put your learning map in. You need to add your comments into that before you mid-place and around each of the learning areas. From, paragraph to 2 paragraphs, that's kind of what most people do, paragraph, and explaining what you've learnt under each of those learning outcomes. So those comments, that portfolio, and then that mid-placement meeting which you run, like Alex did, it might be a D&D game. Generally, people just do a PowerPoint. But, it's that is all of those components are when I'm looking, because I'm a FEL as well, I'm looking at how you're going, with each of those areas. And then I'll tell you, okay, well, you're at, developing competency here. Great, keep up the great work, just add doing these things. Okay, so that's your mid-placement. Final placement, exactly the same thing, except for you don't have to do the organisational context document. And you're only meeting with the FEL. In the mid-placement meeting, you're meeting with the FEL, your on-site supervisor, and if you have an EFE, they are there as well. Anything else? Have I missed anything? Okay, I think... Yes, we... and what they might be asked as well, and not to say that they don't want to do social work at the interview. So, do you want to add anything, Janine?
Thank you. Hi. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces. Almost everyone here has been in my class at some stage. So I'm just to clarify, I'm not involved in field education anymore, but I'm still doing a handover with Tony, who's on sick leave, and a few other people. But just wanted to add a couple of things to what Joe was saying. First of all, in terms of preparation for your placement interview, which probably is the most important thing really to be focusing on now, and that is wherever you get matched to a placement, you don't really know until you're there what it's going to be like. So the first thing is to not be rigid about your idea about where you want to go on placement, because you honestly really don't know until you're there what it's going to be like, and you might have a preconception that a particular field of practice might not be that interesting, but in fact once you're there you love it, and vice versa. We've had people who've had their heart set on a particular field of practice and have gone into that and have said, oh my goodness, this is not what I thought it was going to be. So just having that open mind about the learning opportunities in whichever field you placed and whichever agency, and contacting your field education liaison person in the first instance if you are having any difficulties on placement, because sometimes people do and legitimately need to be moved out of a placement that's not providing you adequate learning opportunities or not being adequately supportive, and the field education staff genuinely are there to support you in that process. So never be scared to contact people. That's what they're there for, and we're always happy to be contacted. And yeah, just in terms also of preparation for the placement interview, remembering that no matter what the agency is that you've been matched to, you're really trying to put your best foot forward and make a good impression and show the agency staff that you're going to be a valuable contributor to the team. Yeah, because that's what they're essentially going to be looking for. They don't want to get the vibe from you that you're going to be hard work throughout the placement. So yeah, really trying to put your best foot forward. And I feel like I'm just rambling on. Is there anything in particular that you would like me to talk about?
No.
Anyone?
Questions?
Or-
We covered it all. We're getting tired now.
Maybe just one other thing to add by way of reassurance, because some of the discussion, involves things like placement terminations. The vast majority of people have a really smooth experience on placement. The vast majority. So, those barriers and obstacles that some people face are rare. And when they do happen, you've got a whole bunch of people who are there to support you to try and work it out.
I absolutely agree. Sorry, out of 355 students, it might be 10 if you're lucky. So yeah, and that's life, isn't it? Wherever you are, even in the workforce, things happen for people. So yeah, did you want to add anything? Do you want to share anything else about field placement?
Well, speaking on the going through not getting a place, I actually did do an interview and ended up not getting that placement. The agency didn't even have the courtesy to let me know that they rejected me going. I had to find out from the Will team 3 weeks later after the interview. So I can say that the team is always excellent. They're there for you. to work for you to get you the best experience that you can. And the simple fact is that placement, it came down to, we do so many things via sticky notes and pieces of paper. We don't think you'd have an easy time here doing placement. And I'm like, okay, fine. Your loss, not mine. And then I ended up at the community centre and had 500 excellent hours. And I'm still there volunteering. So, you know, it's one of those places that it's stuck with you. So as Janine said, go in with an open mind. I've always loved community work, but I still went in with an open mind and got a lot more out of it than I expected. You never know what you're going to learn. You never know who you're going to meet. So the best thing is enjoy it. Yeah, absolutely. Just make sure you find a way to enjoy yourself. And everything will start to make sense if you can find a way to do that. Your theories will click in. Everything you've been learning will start to click in ways you also don't expect, which is also what your supervision's good for, because you can start going over that and realising where things all fit.
You don't have to be the expert, you know, you're there to learn, you know, so don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's how you learn. Ask questions, you know. And we work really hard to find placements, don't we, that are, like, we vet all of our placements, and if we have any feedback that it's not appropriate, then, you know, we don't send students back there. So we work really hard to find appropriate placements and make sure that there is social work learning in those placements. Even if there's not a social worker, there's so many places that a social worker, like you, are there to kind of help as well, do you know what I mean, and fill in a gap. So yeah, it's we try really hard to look at what your needs are, your interests, and match you as best we can with an appropriate placement. I think I've been taken over by the dog.
Are there any other questions? Because I think we've hit the time limit for the refreshments time, or when we have a meet and greet or something. And Angela and I did also have, if you want to come up and grab the pre-placement calendar, we've got some. Oh, it's been handed out? Never mind, just handed out. So, so have a look at that. If you haven't already, please nominate yourself for placement. It will close on Sunday the 8th, and that will get you into the, on the ball. Now, I think Lucas has something to do.
Guys, before you go, can the FUSWA team, can you guys stand up and come up here? Richa, Anna, Akesh, Jackie, Nan, Siobhan's gone, so stand up, come up. So I want you guys just to stand behind the team. No.
Is it like water balloons?
I would know. All right, so, yep, stand up. So, firstly, thank you, I want you guys just to thank everyone that's up here for all the hard work they've done. All right, and there's no more questions, so what we'll do is we'll draw 2 names out of this bowl, and I'll ask Alex, if you'd like, you can. Yeah. So there you go. So just 2 pieces of paper. 1, 2. Johanna and Annalise, if you'd like to read out the names, and we have Jackie does have the vouchers.
Forgive me if I don't read the handwriting correct, but I think we've got Orleen Kerr or Arlene. Arlene. So sorry. Arlene Kerr. Yep.
And Brenda Lynn. Brenda? Well, congratulations.